Joyner, and I am coordinating the Resilient Communities program initiative, and I am very pleased to have so many people here today. I'd like to ask our prioress, Pat Seaman, to please come up, welcome us all, and lead us in prayer. Thank you.
So first of all, welcome everyone. It's such a privilege for me to be able to do the easy part. So we are so grateful for your presence with us today. This is the second educational program we are sponsoring in our congregation's year-long communal study to learn what it takes to create resilient communities. This program flows from a commitment we made at our 2016 General Chapter to help facilitate and participate in creating resilient communities with people who are relegated to the margins. I would like to just ask how many of you may have been at our first educational session in March? Welcome back. Good. Well, and for those of you who are joining us for the first time today for this resilient community education, you're in for some very excellent experience, I think, from our speakers. So on March 12th, we heard from 5 outstanding speakers from different parts of the country, national thought leaders on community development who shared their insights and experience on building resilience. Today, we are blessed to hear from 3 of our own Adrian Dominican Sisters whose wisdom and experience we are tapping in this forum on resiliency in our midst. Sisters Maurine Barzantni, Judy Biron, and Janet Stankowski will share with us the lessons they have learned through their work with marginalized communities in the Dominican Republic, Detroit, and Seattle. I will be turning this back over to Dee Joyner, who is an Adrian Dominican associate and also the director of our Office of Resilient Communities. Dee will facilitate the forum. Dee will provide us with an overview of the day and introduce each of our speakers. But before I do that, I invite each of us to enter into the quiet of our hearts, the deepest sanctuary of our being, as we bring to mind the presence of God in our midst. As I light this Christ fire, I give thanks to all who brought us to this moment. Our Creator God, the first peoples of this land who knew its sacredness and animacy, all our ancestors and relations, the whole community of earth that supports us. May we listen and learn from you. May our ears and eyes and hearts and minds be opened, and may we be inspired to join together in new ways to create and strengthen resiliency in each of our communities. Dee.
Thank you so very much, Pat. And I too would like to welcome all of you to our forum this afternoon. And especially, in addition to the people who are here in the room, who could be with us today here in the room, all of you who are joining us, whether by live stream or broadcast here in the community, We are so glad that all of you could join in, because this is part of our journey to continue to learn more about resilient communities, and especially about how we can effectively facilitate and participate with those who traditionally are on the margins of the community to create resiliency in many places. So thank you all so much for being here. And I especially want to thank our 3 speakers who said yes when we asked them to come and share their stories with us. And they have phenomenal stories to share that I think will really help bring to life for all of us what resilient communities is really all about, and the importance of the role in engaging with the community in determining what the best path forward is. So thank you so much. We've asked each of our speakers today to share with us more the how they went about engaging with the community than necessarily the what, although you're going to hear some of that too as they share their journeys with us today. We were especially interested in learning about the people on the margins with whom they have, whose lives they have impacted through the work they have done over a number of years, and especially how they've gone about building trust and partnerships to form really strong relationships as they accomplished what they did. So the way this is going to work today is each speaker will have about 30 minutes to share their stories with us. And after that, we'll take a few minutes to talk among one another about what really struck us and what questions you have that you would like to ask the speakers. And then we'll have probably about 10 minutes to have question and answer with each speaker after they're finished with their presentation. Once the first 2 speakers are finished, we're going to take a 10-minute break and then come back, hear our 3rd speaker, and then we're going to invite all 3 to the front of the room for a little panel discussion, raising up what some of the key concepts and learnings are that we've heard this afternoon, and then again offering you another opportunity to ask questions that maybe you didn't have a chance to ask during their presentations today. So we have a short time together. We said that we would conclude by 4:30, and we're going to try our best to do that for all of you, because I know that's what you've planned for. But we have a lot to cover in this short period of time. So with no further ado, I am going to go ahead and begin with introducing our first speaker. Sister Janet Stankowski developed a strong partnership with Associate Patty Gillis when they co-founded Voices for Earth Justice. Their shared commitment to earth justice eventually led them to the Brightmoor neighborhood in Detroit and the creation of Hope House. From a vacant and dilapidated structure, they rehabbed with the help of volunteers. Core to Janet's work has been the building of trust and collaborations with the interfaith community. I remember when I first talked to her, she said, "You know, Dee, the way you build trust is not to show up at a meeting. The way you build trust is to show up and pray together." And that really struck me. She also believes in engaging the young people in the community, in community building, in the mission, if you will. And she has one of her coworkers that she brought with her today, Julia Hall, who she will introduce a little bit more in just a minute as part of her presentation. But Julia is responsible for community gardening and actually spent the morning through now here in Adrian with Elaine Johnson touring the permaculture garden and sharing with each other. So planting those seeds, it's an apt analogy here, I think, for what might come as those of you who are engaged in this ministry continue to grow. Janet, we look forward to hearing from you about how you've gone about building resiliency in Detroit and the Brightmoor neighborhood by engaging others in promoting earth justice. Please join me in welcoming Sister Janet Stankowski.
It's not on page 1. No.
I wish Patty was here to be with us. She's in Montana with family, enjoying and connecting with creation. So she helped prepare this presentation. I'd also like to introduce Doris Ellen. Doris Ellen is a board member of Voices for Earth Justice. Dr. Allen is the former director of the Community Dental Clinic in Ann Arbor. She's a third order Franciscan, and her mom was a Cherokee, and she brings great diversity to our board. Thank you, Doris, for being here. And Julia Hall, where are you, Julia? Julia is a Christ the King Service Corps volunteer that is with us for the year. She's a graduate from the University of Dayton, and she is a lay member of the Marianists. So thank you. I hope to quickly go through this outline, which you've seen out of order, and whatever happens, happens as we keep on going here. I'm going to tell our story. So in the beginning, both Patty and I were working in parishes in the city of Detroit. As ministers in the city, we were all aware of the poverty that was caused by environmental racism. There was trash on the streets, lead in many of the residents, lead paint. The incinerator plants were nearby, so pollution was all over. The neighborhoods continued to experience diminishment with the closing of schools, churches, grocery stores, and access to farm fresh anything. In the faith communities, we had very few individuals in 2000, or only a small group of people that were interested in caring for creation. So our interfaith collaboration began early on as we put a diverse board together of Christians, Muslims, and Jews. Our first grant funders were the National Council of Churches and the Archdiocese of Detroit. I will try to quickly review 6 spiritual foundations for starting Voices for Justice. First of all, we believe that a spiritual conversion, a transformation of consciousness, was needed to make the pollution and destruction stop. Second foundation is Catholic social teaching, which was part of our background, Patty and my background as ministers. The U.S. bishops early on talked about climate change in their 2001 document, and the community was talking about climate change at the time. The third spiritual foundation was the Iroquois philosophy that the decisions we make today should result in a sustainable world for 7 generations into the future. The fourth is the mystical foundation. We leaned on the rich history of the mystics, especially the medieval women like Juliana of Norwich, Clare of Assisi, and Hildegard of Bingen. The fifth foundation was the Adrian Dominican Earth Celebrators. This was a community-wide group of Adrian Dominican Sisters who met regularly in the 1990s. Patty Gillis was part of this group, along with Pat Benson, who later became a VEJ board member. Out of this group came this wonderful definition of eco-spirituality at the top of the page. And the sixth spiritual foundation came from the words of Thomas Berry, explaining the implications of evolution on our thinking and spirituality. For a year, our board met monthly and kept taking apart this definition and putting it together and reworking it. And it was based on the 4 pillars of Dominican life. And the statement in short says, we are an interfaith group committed to prayer, education, and action on behalf of Earth. The statement involves a network of people building a vision of community, and the words wonder, responsibility, and gratitude came from the definition of the Earth Celebrators on eco-spirituality. living the mission. Prayer was and is our focus, to bring people together to pray for peace and harmony and care for all creation. Prayer has been sponsored or hosted in various places by various groups. On the left is an interfaith prayer service to dedicate the Peace Pole on International Peace Day at Hope House property. We had a rabbi from outside the community, an imam from the community, and a priest from the Brightmoor area participate. And on the right is an Earth Day prayer in Detroit that included drumming, and it was co-sponsored by young people in the Central Detroit Christian group. Living the mission, education. Obviously, we've held many workshops, retreats, and assisted congregations in building green teams. Our programs and speaker opportunities have centered around climate change, healthy aging, Laudato Si, Awaken the Dreamer, and harmful chemicals in the environment. Pictured on the left is Maitri, a Buddhist monk that was a board member for a while. He joined us for workshops, and he even helped us connect with his Buddhist monastery in Southfield for a winter solstice. On the right is Abdul, our neighbor and a volunteer, and he has 10 children, and he's from the local mosque. Action. Numerous actions have included postcard writing, letters to the editor, cleanup activities, climate marches, and visits to our government representatives. VEJ worked in partnership with many groups, including parish nurses in Detroit, on health and environmental policies. We led the Michigan Interfaith Climate and Energy Campaign until its passage of renewable energy standards in 2008. And part of this was publishing a document called the Michigan Interfaith Charter, which was delivered to governors and legislators and had quotes from the various religions of what their document stated. Community. We have co-sponsored numerous community building events with local congregations and environmental groups. The first one on the left is the Michigan Interfaith Power and Light, and they started a little bit after we did, and we're a faith-based group also, so it was natural for us to join efforts when we did workshops and speaking engagements. On the right is an example of connecting with Creation Earth Day retreats. We held 13 years at the U of M Dearborn Environmental Interpretive Center, and many people, we hoped, took their experiences and knowledge with them back to their communities. Now comes Hope House in 2011. So we purchased two houses on 5 lots on the west side of Detroit called Brightmoor. Many people in this community are struggling to survive. For example, 40% of the children live in poverty, compared with 13% of the children statewide. The view of the property on the left is what the house looked like when we bought it. And on the right is our cross street. We're on the corner of Graydale and Puritan. And across the street from us is a beautiful park with a baseball field, children's playground, walking trail, basketball benches, and a community center. So we feel we were ideally led by God because we were denied houses or property to be purchased north of 5 Mile, and every one of those fell through, and then we were led to this place, which couldn't be better. So failures and turning down are all good things that happen to us. Many challenges. This was a huge challenge, this property was. It had been abandoned for 8 years, and before it was a dumping ground for trash. and the opening buildings had been stripped of electrical and plumbing systems by scrappers. A youth gang met in the house, and it was an unsecured building for all that time. So we began the remodeling, which we did try to see that everything was reused and recycled. And then the picture on the right became the caretaker's cottage later on with someone living in it, but we've had many groups meet in there. Our first volunteers came from the Levin Mission Group and other Adrian Dominicans in the area. They helped haul out trash, and they tackled an overgrown garden and public areas. The Adrian Dominicans also for years supported us by serving on the board of directors, gardening, cleanup, painting, art and photography, event planning, event attendance, prayer support, and financial support from the ministry trust. The tough decision of this 100-year-old craftsman-style house was that it had a bad foundation. So the board of directors said we will deconstruct the front of the house. And that means we had to work hard, and it took a few years because if you're going to repurpose the windows and the doors and the shingles and everything, you've got to find those people that come and get them and take them. And so we did, and we then put on the new facade, and the open area in the front became our rain garden in front of the words hope there, where it was funded by Freshwater Future. Building resiliency, this is the definition that was created by our leadership teams and is part of our Conversation Cafe. So VEJ decided to purchase property in Detroit because we wanted to be part of a community. We wanted to live our mission within a local community. Before that, we were living out of different sites, and that worked for the time. The people in our neighborhood struggle with poverty as well as the disintegration of their community. Most of the streets have many abandoned houses. There are some new structures that are occupied. Then the city has come through and torn down many of the houses. But still others remain right across the street from us, overgrown, boarded up, and half burned out. Neighbors are no longer close, and many of the local institutions have moved out. There is a feeling of being left behind and left out. Another word for marginalization. When we became part of the Brightmoor community, we met our neighbors by going door to door to places where they met. Community groups, local churches, a mosque, a neighborhood group. We tried not to have any agenda beyond being a good neighbor. We tried to listen more than we talked. Some issues that were brought up were loneliness, lack of recreation, blight, and racism. The picture on the left is neighbors in the garden, and on the left is a barbecue sign that the children made. We hold potlucks and open houses, and that barbecue was one of them, with garden tours, and we invite the community groups and neighbors close by. Because VEJ is on a corner across from a park, many people walk by. We believe that speaking and engaging with passersby is more important than the immediate garden task. We learn much about the history of the neighborhood in these encounters and around the campfire in the backyard at Hope House. These are some of our successful partnerships. I'm just going to say that at a glance, some are older ones and we're not as actively involved anymore, but because of those beginning partnerships, we still rely on each other for important things, and some are new partnerships that we're forging. Seek equity and justice. So the difference between equality and equity means we are committed to positive outcomes, so we target resources to where they are needed. Voices for Earth Justice works with groups that challenge structures that cause inequity. Amina Maxi's in the second picture representing zero waste, and she was a presenter at one of our Earth Day celebrations in 2014. It happened to be an Earth Day celebration that rained, so we were inside. You saw these 6 foundational spiritual statements before, but now I want to stress spiritual wisdom and healing. We believe that healing comes through engagement with soil, water, plants, animals, and other humans, connecting in meaningful ways. Meditation, or spiritual wisdom, is built into every encounter we have with people. Concern for future generations and how they will survive and thrive is embedded into sustainability. VEJ models sustainable living at Hope House, and we also teach it. For example, in the summer of 2017, 104 people attended classes at Hope House on resiliency, covering topics of herbalism, gardening, food preparation, meditation, tool use, and communication. Successes and failures. So the statement that says the process engages diverse grassroots leaders. This aspect of resiliency is where we have the most challenges. Brightmoor has the Brightmoor Alliance and Neighbors Building Brightmoor, are 2 groups that have been charged with developing a process that leads to a vision of community for our area. In one case, not everyone was invited to the table, especially longtime residents. And in the other case, the community organizing process was aborted to providing direct service. In light of these disappointments, Voices decided to support future grassroots leaders and those who are marginalized through education and mentoring. And here are some of our successes. We have had interns and Service Corps workers. Some have stayed with us for a short time, and some have stayed with us for a longer time. And I want to share Naeem's story. Naeem came as a Capuchin Volunteer Corps worker and stayed on for 2 more years as our garden outreach coordinator. Living in the caretaker cottage at Hope House, he enjoyed being a good neighbor to all. He lived the mission with his prayerful spirit, sharing his vast knowledge of biology and his work for equity and justice. For 3 years, Naeem led VEJ's partnership with the Detroit Black Food Security Network, and he led efforts for the BioBlitz of the D-Town Farm in Detroit. In the center, he's working with 2 of our volunteers, but he worked with 200 volunteers, and he supervised interns. And in the third picture on the right, Naeem is with his fiancee, Jessica Taylor, who will be married in October this year. And he is still working in Brightmoor as the new director of the MSU Partnership for Food, Learning, and Innovation. Mentoring interns is what we like, and the first picture is of Chloe Hypes, and she is a U of M intern, so they pay her to work with us for the summer. And she is sitting with Julia, who will be staying with us for the whole year. In the center is L'Oreal Hawks, and she was our U of M summer intern last summer, and we hired her this summer to be our garden manager. And then she is in the middle at our open house with Regina, who is our backyard neighbor on the other street. And on the right here, she is pictured with youth from Repair the World, and they are building a permaculture hugel bed. I don't even know what it is, but so that's why I brought people with me. I see the result. I'm just not there. So mentoring neighborhood youth, we act as if it's a success. That in the summer of 2016, young adult interns supervised younger children, and the young adults were paid by a grant from the Clem Kern Foundation. And this summer is a picture of our children from the neighborhood finding friends, learning, and fun at Hope House. Our two other programs of success is that the GLAD chapter, the Great Lakes or whatever, funded us for a chapter initiative in 2007. We purchased 2,500 CFL light bulbs, and along with energy efficiency lesson plans, we visited fifth graders and their teachers in schools in Detroit and Highland Park. Sister Sheila Delaney and Associates Mercedes Fitzsimmons and Carol Hofer coordinated this effort. And on the right, the Detroit Youth Energy Squad was started by Voices for Justice with seed grant money from the state of Michigan in 2008. Urban youth were taught energy efficiency retrofits that would lower carbon footprints and energy bills in lower income homes. This program was started in partnership with Warm Training and is now part of EchoWorks. VEJ has had many partners, we said, since our beginning. Some have been great and some didn't work out so well. So I'm going to talk about one that didn't work out so well. This is one that worked out well and still is working. This picture is of Michigan Interfaith Power and Light, and Jenny King and our sister Jenny King and Patty Gillis are there in the middle, and they're at the Poor People's March in Lansing. Again, partnerships around Hope House in Brightmoor have been more difficult to forge. So here's a faltering partnership. Being faith-based ourselves, we reached out to congregations around Hope House. We found that there were about 50 churches and 2 mosques in the Brightmoor area, and only 10 of these congregations were involved in the local community. We were happy when we were welcomed at Hope Community Church of Christ, just down the block from us, a small congregation with people from the immediate area. It began like many relationships, visiting each other's homes. They brought their summer Bible camp to our site for prayer, praise, and earth-centered activity, and there's Doris leading some of the drumming activity at that Bible school. And the next year, we went to summer Bible school at their site, and we thought we were on the road to a scenario of a success story. So starting in January of 2016, our gardener, Naeem, met with the garden planning group at Hope House on Wednesday evenings during the winter. They planned for a planting day on property that was owned by the church and was just vacant. Cinder blocks were donated, dirt was brought, plants and flowers were brought. The planting day was set for May 30th, and the pastor and only 2 people from the church showed up. Most of the volunteers came from outside the community and were recruited by Voices for Earth Justice. As the summer went on, no one from the church came to tend and water the plants and flowers. Everything died, and about a year and a half later, they sold the property. An ongoing collaboration is a partnership with the mosque at the other end of our block, and it began when I asked if we could come and support and pray together for peace in our country and on the planet. Voices for Earth Justice went on Fridays for over a year, and then we planned this field day together. And in the picture is some international sisters and students from Madonna with children from the mosque, and Annette Disluver, one of our sisters in the front, and the white legs in the back, our sister Janet Trout, that helped with that day. The imam and his daughter were part of that. He was a bit skeptical of us doing it, but it worked out. Repair the World is a Jewish young adult group, service group based in Detroit, and has been volunteering at Hope House for over 3 years. In this first slide, it's December of 2014, and Repair the World young people attend a prayer service at Baber Memorial AME and Brightmoor. They asked the next year if they could co-sponsor the event with us on Bagley in Southwest Detroit, and they asked our help with planning the meeting. The next slide is Live Cold Gallery, which is a new partner that established an art studio at Hope House and conducted a free art camp on our property this summer. And what we've learned that direct service is always needed, but it's not our job. That we need to stay true to our mission and to the Brightmoor Redford community. We need to draw on our spiritual roots for strength, beauty, and insight. That the lure of money for funding often leads into mission creep, but we want to draw on the relationships we have, be open to new ones, and keep a balance between neighbors and guests from outside the community. We want to go as far as possible with partners, accepting each other's limitations and connecting with the community. And democracy is at risk. We need to speak for equity and justice. Black Lives Matter. And I leave you with the permaculture principles. They make sense to us and helpful. Some of these principles are being lived out at Hope House, and others are an ideal we aspire to. Thank you.
Wow, that was terrific, wasn't it? Woo!
Thank you.
All right, take a couple of minutes, turn to the person next to you, and just discuss a little bit about what really stood out to you about what Janet shared with us, and what might be a burning question that you'd like to ask, and then we'll come back and take a few questions right now. So just talk for a couple minutes.
Okay, good. I'm so happy I'm done.
So I'll just stand up here with
Yep.
you, and we'll kind of facilitate this. Perfect timing, too.
Well, that's what, I tried to keep it to 25 minutes so I could ad-lib something, because if I didn't, it would be very boring, as everyone said. I was just rushing through. But again, whatever it felt like given the whole scope, so.
Well, I think we're very reaction.
Good.
If I lose track of time if I don't use my little timer.
Yeah, no, I'm all for it. I'm going to put a mint in my mouth.
Okay.
good. Pat and Doris are talking. Now we're good. Good going, Doris.
Oh.
Yeah.
Very good.
Get a picture of that one for my.
All right, if you'd wrap up your conversations, please. All right, we have time for a few questions. Let me say this. We have two people who have microphones that they're going to pass around. We have Fran and Elise. And please speak into the microphone no matter how loud your voice is, because otherwise the people who are attending by live stream aren't going to be able to hear you. So who would like to go first? Terry Ann.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. I'm just totally inspired because I know that was a long haul presentation, and you all have been at it for years. What I'm curious about, because any project that brings about resilience, I think you got to have stamina and you got to keep hope that the mission is possible. How'd you do with that?
I don't know, I have a great answer, but certainly if you've got the dedication, if you start there with prayer, and it was great having a partner because we could bring each other constantly back to why we're here and what are we doing, and I think Patty prays a lot more than I do, so I'm real happy to have that prayer partner as we went through lots of hurdles too.
Thank you, Janet. It was an inspiring presentation. But there was one line you used at the very end, and I'm curious about it. I think you said direct services are needed, but not our job. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. Again, a lot of people stop by and they need everything. They need food, they need to pay their rent, they need to, clothes. I mean, whatever it is, they need direct service. So we've made it our mission to know where we can send them, but that we don't provide any of it. So, yeah.
So could you just finish that up? When you say we don't do it because that's not our role, because you are about, I could fill in the blank, but I want you to.
Saving the planet through prayer, education, and action.
And I hear you also building capacity of the neighborhood.
Right.
By the social interactions and events.
Yes.
There's one back there.
Krista Marsick. Janet, I was so impressed by the fact that over the years you've had such struggle, and yet you persevered. And I think that, that's admirable.
Thank you.
The other question I really have also is, what about when you have to withdraw, and Patty Gillis also, how empowered are the people in the community there to take over?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, Patty withdrew a year ago, June. So we hired an executive director, a young man, 41 years old. And he comes from a faith background of being an evangelical person, but in his interview, he talked about his whole new revelation of what's happening in the world and earth, and he's got to veer away from some of the things he used to believe. So we thought he would be a good person to engage with as we continue the journey. So we're trying to let go, and we're trying to let God help see. I don't know what the neighborhood can do. I really don't know what the community can do. We're saying to ourselves that we did some good things for the amount of years that we've been here, And where this might go or how it might change is really gonna, like, we're bringing on 3 or 4 new board members. We're phasing out our other board members. We're phasing me out. You know, we're trying to see how do we transition, and we'd rather do it sooner than later. I'm 71. I probably could stay doing it for a while, but should I? Is that the most important thing to do right now? I don't think it is. I think it is to help, you know, be in the transition. And as I said, I might not know the latest things they're doing at Hope House today, but that's good.
There's one over here.
I got the mic. Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead here, and then.
Thank you. Janet, is this being replicated in other places? I don't just mean the Metro Detroit area, but are you aware of anybody doing research to replicate this?
I am not. I would say the group that's leading the effort is Michigan Interfaith Power and Light. It's in California. Excuse me. It, you know, is in different places. I'm not saying that there still continue to be faith-based groups through their churches, you know, that do it, but to do a nonprofit on your own, I'm not sure. I don't know of any.
First of all, congratulations on your wonderful collaboration. That list of collaborators is marvelous. My question is, your new executive director and you said you're expanding your board. Are those people who are coming into those roles, are they from the community?
No, right? We tried to interview, but once again, the expertise isn't there at this time. So, and the other thing that's very, very difficult, so it's a great question, is that lots of people are renters. They're not staying. I mean, they're coming and going just like everything else. And when they're not paying rent, if nobody catches up with them, they're there for a longer time. But if they catch up with them, then they're out.
That takes you back to the question that Pat just the point that Pat just raised in terms of capacity building, so that in the future there can be leadership emerging
Yes,
from that.
absolutely. Yes, that's exactly correct. That would be a dream.
And just to build on that again, I think part of the challenge also, though, is when you're really working with marginalized communities, a lot of the people with capacity have moved elsewhere because they've had other opportunities. So I think that's really important for our learning. Anyway.
Yeah, thank you. That's true.
Hello.
Hi.
You had mentioned that one of your failures was that not everyone was at the table that you felt needed to be early on.
Right.
Is there, for those of us doing work in other communities on building resiliency, is there a key individual or person or population that we should be sure is at our table as we start to have these conversations?
I guess you just have to look at the makeup of your community. So our community was, the African American community is the new community. The old community is people who came because of the car industry, and a lot of them are from the South. And so as the new energy and money was being poured into Brightmoor, a significant amount of money was being put through the Fisher Foundation into these two groups that I mentioned. So they were gathering the new folks in the community, but they were leaving behind all those who were faithfully, members. They're at the soup kitchen at this day. So I think if you just go around and look and see who's at different places, you might gather, to know who might be different groups that need representation.
Janet, I think we have time for one more question. How's that? Is that all right with you? Okay.
It's not exactly a question, but I know that Naeem now is working in another position. And so there's the positive piece of it is that as people work in the nonprofits, maybe for not a full salary, when they get a full salary, lots of times they stay in the community and doing similar work, and that's a gift.
Right. Yes, Naeem's a great success story.
Well, thank you all very much for those questions, and Janet. And we're going to tee up Maureen's presentation. And please keep track of those questions you didn't get to answer, and hopefully we'll have a chance to get back to them later. It's always, my challenge, technology is not my strong suit by any stretch of the imagination, so I'm up here shaking as I'm trying to make sure I get Sister Maureen's presentation up here. So let me find, okay, all right. So next up will be Sister Maurine Barzantni, and she has spent many years, as I know probably most of you in this room are very well aware, participating and facilitating with those who have been relegated to the margins to build resilient communities. And as Pat mentioned in her introduction, she's worked in the Dominican Republic, in Kenya, and among the carrier nation in British Columbia. Maurine currently serves on the Adrian Resilient Communities Committee, sharing her wisdom and from these experiences with us, and for which we are very, very grateful, Maurine. Maurine knows firsthand the importance of meeting those traditionally left out of decisions affecting their lives where they are, even if it's under a tree. So Maurine, we look very forward to hearing from you how you build trust among those with whom you lived and worked, in creating resilient communities that have sustained until this day. So let's welcome Maurine, Sister Maurine Barzantni.
Thank you, Dee. One doesn't always get the opportunity to talk for half an hour about their favorite people and favorite place, so I'm grateful for this opportunity. The slide that you're looking at is our first view of the 200 scattered houses that were found on the crossroads to a town called Arroyo Hondo. This group of houses had no name. It was just located on the crossroads to another community. We would probably call it a squatters community. Now, that was 1992 when Sister Renee and I first saw the community. The place, it was in the lowlands below deforested mountains, and the farmlands were dry after many years of a drought, and so they were not productive. Neither streams nor rivers run through this area. It is desert-like. The people, okay. The people come from, they didn't come on by choice. They came because they were evicted from their ancestral lands in the mountains in order to make way for a energy plant. Nothing's happening. There it goes. Okay, so the people came from different parts of the mountains, so they didn't share the same traditions or the same history. So when they arrived in this place, they had no context or no, relationship with each other. And actually, they did not trust each other. So the community was a grouping of poor houses. It grew without any planning, and there was little perception of community. The sources of work were the salt mines. A good number of Haitian families had preceded the Dominican families. They were lured by jobs in the salt mines. And when the Dominican families arrived, they would have liked to be farmers because that's what they did in the mountain lands. But because of the drought, almost everybody ended up in the Zona Franca. Now, the Zona Franca is the tax-free zone where the sweatshops of mostly the garment industry are located. So our beginnings, we entered the community by 2 invitations. The first was by the bishop, and he actually heard that there were 2 Adrian Dominicans in the capital who were studying Spanish. So he came to our house for breakfast one morning, and he said, "Would you come and just be with my people? They are the poorest in my diocese." And then as we were driving through the community one day, a group of residents of the community invited us to come and just be with them. Actually, the words they used were, "Please walk with us." So we had no agenda. The community trusted us. Now, that's because of the work of the religious women in all parts of the island. People trusted religious women. And we did not take on any leadership role. We were still learning the language to begin with. And also, we just felt that people had to take control of their own lives, and they had to be the ones planning their own future. And we had nothing else to do, so we were totally present to them. I mean, really, when you think of it, that's important. Our whole waking hours were figuring out what we can do, how we can do it. The skills we brought were organizational skills. Renee had a master's degree in education and in education leadership. I had quite a bit of experience in volunteering for neighborhood organizations in Chicago. Whatever neighborhood I was working in, I always participated in the local neighborhood organizations. We were both good at networking, very successful in grant writing. And the last one, hospitality, I starred because that was a surprise to me. It just happened that we were offered by the Scarborough missionaries to live in a retreat, a kind of an abandoned retreat complex. And there was room there for between 25 and 30 guests. Very rustic. My good friend from Canada calls it a half-star motel. But it worked. So we were able to invite people, anybody who was interested in coming, we could invite up to 30 people. And so we constantly had guests and groups. Now, I had always thought that people that went to other countries to look at poverty were kind of gawkers, and I really didn't approve of it very much. But I realized that when our guests came into this community, the people were absolutely so pleased. They would say over and over again, "Who am I that your friends would come and visit me?" It was a real eye-opener for me. And it gave them such a sense of self-respect. So that was always a good beginning. Okay, so what did we do? Lots and lots of meetings. We met with anybody who would come. And somebody mentioned under the tree. And there were no buildings. Well, there was one old farmer's building that didn't have a roof. But so we met under the tree. It was a huge acacia sort of tree. We met with the farmers, with the youth, with children, with women, with people from the Zona Franca. But the people who were faithful were the women. They were the mothers. And we met with them twice a week. We thought it was so that we could get to know them, but then we discovered that it was really so that they could get to know each other. We played and we prayed, we studied, we celebrated. We did anything we could just to be together. We insisted that the women take leadership of each of their own meetings, and we would say to them, we can't do it because our Spanish isn't good enough. But that gave them the power to be able to do it themselves. It took a whole lot of time because we would have to practice reading. Oh, I should have told you in the beginning that there were few opportunities for education in the mountain villages, so the majority of the people had a very low level of literacy. So we would have to practice with them, how to read in a group, how to make an agenda. We role-played with them so that they could manage a meeting. And we sat down and they took the leadership. So this is one of our first meetings. And at each meeting, they gained more and more confidence. So this would have been one of our planning meetings the night before or the morning before. We also gave classes, anything we could think of, literacy classes, child nutrition classes, child care classes, anything we could think of for the purpose of having the women engage with each other. And we celebrated. Notice, under the tree. And this group of women emerged as leaders. There were about a dozen of them, and almost all of them are still the leaders in the community. Now, we did this for 2 years, absolutely making no decisions, simply meeting. Another thing I should tell you is there was a perception that we are poor. And we're meant to be poor. We'll always be poor. And I remember one day Renee blurting out, do you think God wants you to be poor? And to a woman, everyone said yes. And so in our planning, we began to look for songs and for scripture readings and themes that were about liberation. And they came to the realization, no, a loving God does not want anyone to be poor. And we are not meant to be this. And one day, it was like a magic day. We came to the meeting and everybody was seated, and there was just a sense of, we're in this together. We're one. And one woman summed it up. She said, I thought that these women were my enemies, but now I know that each of us wants the same thing. We want a better life for our children. And that just changed everything. So then we began to have serious meetings. We would, the women actually listed the needs of the community. They formed committees and planned strategies on how to relate and how to treat these needs. So the biggest problem was water. The only water coming into the community was an irrigation ditch. If you look at the bottom of the picture, children swam in it, animals walked through it, women washed their clothes in it, and worst of all, they carried the water back to their houses for cooking and for drinking. Well, you can imagine the health problems that came from this. And as the community grew, the health problems grew also. Small children were failing to thrive. There was eruption of skin diseases, gastrointestinal diseases, tetanus. So the first committee was the water committee. And then the second committee was the health committee. We also had an electricity committee, which never came to anything. We never did get constant electricity. But the worst of it, I think, was there was a sense that there is no future among the young people, the young adults. Why bother? There's no future. So what we tried to do was build a culture of collaboration. The men's groups with the women's groups, government agencies with the community, neighboring communities with our community, nonprofits, international. We collaborated in any way we could. The Pentecostal church with the Catholic church, which was difficult for our Scarborough missionary, who didn't approve of that at all. And we had other blocks in that, in relation to that. We had a professor from St. Joseph University who visited the community, and he was so impressed with the way the women were working that he actually based his next publication on this women's group. And this is what he said about it. The program driven by discourse of radical learning for the purpose of collaborative advocacy. He would have called all of our meetings revolutionary education. That was the term that he used for that. So the committees had successes. The first success was the health committee went to the health department and said, we have no running water, obviously no bathrooms, we have no latrines, this is the situation. So the World Health Organization gave us 220 prefabricated latrines. The family had to dig the hole and lay the concrete base, but the concrete slabs were free. That took a lot of months, but it took a lot of work in the community because everybody helped everybody else get their latrines set up. And the water committee went to the neighboring town and made an agreement with them that the men could extend the pipes from one community further into the other community. So, get this, twice a week for 2 hours, each of those 2 days, water came into the community, and people lined up with whatever containers they had to carry the water back to their houses to last until the next time the water came. And they celebrated it because it was so wonderful. The health committee also went to the Pueblo, which is the capital of the province, and found 2 doctors who volunteered to give consultations one afternoon a week in the farmers' building, which didn't have a roof. Then they felt very good about that. They had a doctor, they had water, and so now they said, we need a pharmacy. Well, we looked at them and said, how do you do that? But we drove a commission down to Catholic Charities, Caritas International, and sure enough, right off the bat, Caritas said, oh yeah, we'll do that for you. Of course you need a pharmacy. You can't get medicines in your area. And then we will train 3 women to be pharmacist assistants, and they will be certified. And we will even pay for the first inventory of medicine, which was worth about $5,000. So the woman across the street gave us a little corner of her house, and the women opened a pharmacy, and they named it the Salida del Sol, the rising of the sun. Well, of course, what do you think the next thing they wanted was? A medical lab. They said, okay, now we have our medicines, but now he keeps telling us to get lab reports, and we have no lab. And that meant in the whole area that they did not have a lab. It just happened that we had a group from Canada staying with us, and a couple of members of the group belonged to Rotary. And they said, oh, we'll go back home and we'll see if we can get our club to take you on. And they not only did that, but they collaborated with the Ocoa Rotary Club. And Ocoa is a town in the Dominican Republic. And between the 2 Rotary clubs, they raised enough money to equip a lab with very modern equipment, and money also to pay the salary of the technician. Oops. Well, I can't go back, sorry. I don't know how to go back. But anyway, so the men, back? Oh, okay. So there it is, okay. So the men of the town enlarged the pharmacy, and then they added a laboratory onto the pharmacy. So in all of that, I would say that in those 2 years, the achievements were patience. It took 2 years to make one thing happen. strong relationships, trust, confidence, and the sense of self-worth. Those were the real achievements. Now, Jorge Sayla, who is a legendary figure in Caribbean popular education, also used this women's group as his theme for one of his lectures. And he said they created a cohesive network. They learned how to form consensus by sharing perspectives that impacted their lives, reflecting collectively, and working in collaboration. So that made us feel that we had done something right. So in 1994, I don't know if you noticed that when they listed the needs of the community and formed committees, they never even mentioned education. They were just surviving. That was off the radar, you know. So now in 1994, they're saying, we found, and they did a census, 500 children of school age in the community. Aren't you going to help us start a school? Well, we knew, luckily, we had lived in the capital long enough, and our sister Marguerite Louise introduced us to all of these agencies, and that's why we knew where to go. But anyway, we knew of a Jesuit-sponsored Latin American popular education movement. It was called Fe y Alegría, Faith and Joy. And they are committed to giving a good education to the most marginated and the most impoverished people. When they hear of an area that has no education because the government says they can't afford it, just listen to this collaboration. I think it's wonderful. They'll go to the government, the Office of Education, and say, we have a deal for you. We will fundraise and we will build schools and educate teachers if you will promise to pay the salaries of those teachers. And you can call them, they are public schools, and you can put them under your public school system. But they have to be, for the first 10 years, directed by religious women. So just think of the collaboration. You've got a church group sponsoring something with the government, with a religious community. And then the other part of the collaboration is that the parents of the children have to be the ones asking for the school. Like the religious community can't say, oh, we want you to help us with the school. It has to be the parents. So that's the logo of Fe y Alegría. The Espiritu Santo was our own addition because we were in the Holy Spirit parish, so we named the school Espiritu Santo. But there's the meeting. By this time, the Farmers Building got a new roof. And so we met in the building, and the director of Fe y Alegría said, yes, I can see that this community is dedicated to its children, and we will help you with the school if they, Sister Renee and I, would be co-directors. So that September 1994, 127 first graders between the age of 6 and 16 arrived at the door of this little chapel. There should have been 500, but there was a law at that time that a child going to public school had to have a birth certificate. And our Haitian children couldn't get that. And many of the children were born in their homes in the mountains, and it was very difficult to get a birth certificate. We didn't have furniture, we didn't have classrooms, but we had a school. We had found, right when in the beginning, we had found 5 young people who had finished their high school classes. And so 4 of those 5 agreed that they would go to the university and they would teach while they were studying. And our own community paid for the education of these first 4 young people. That was through the Ministry Trust. Now, the school grew so fast, you know, if you have a first grade, you've got to have a first and second the next year, and so on up the line. Our Healthcare West paid for the early childhood center. The health department of the Dominican Republic paid for 2 classrooms and a nutrition center because the undernourishment in the community was so terrible that the health department realized that. And Fay and Alegria built 8 classrooms, but we still had to have classes outside because so many children came. Now, by 1999, we were just starting 6th grade, and at that point, Sister Renee decided to return to the States, so we began another collaboration, and that was with the Caldwell Dominicans. So Sister Pat Stringer came to take her place as co-director. And during that time, we had our first 8th grade graduation. Imagine the excitement in the village. And our Mid-Atlantic province raised money so that we could have solar energy in the school. Electricity just was not available. And Fay and Alegria built and equipped a woodworking shop so that we were not only doing reading, writing, and arithmetic, but we were also doing skills for work and for leadership. And the relationship between school and community was very strong and still is. 2006, the Department of Education asked us to open a high school. So that's the charter class. Again, we didn't have classrooms for them. Took us a few months to get classrooms. Today, that picture on the left is a picture of our teachers. They're young, and there's many of them, and half of them are our own graduates who now have university degrees and are teaching. And the school will be celebrating next year 25 years. Okay. And look at the high school buildings today. We went from, sitting outside to this building. I visited there in 2017, and what I found was vibrant, healthy, futuristic-looking young people who were so proud of their community and of their school. There was just no sense of there is no future anymore. It was amazing. And they loved their co-directors, who are Basilia de la Cruz, the high school director, and Albania Mateo, who is one of our associates, and she was also our first teacher, and she's co-director of the school. And Sister Lucci and Sister Basilia are both working at the school. One is guidance counselor and the other is basically religious education. Now, both of these two women are incredibly creative, and they do much more than just what I named. They are really very creative. And Jose was another one of our very first teachers, and he's the math department, head of the math department for the junior high and the high school. So anyway, it was I know. There were two things that really impressed me. The first was that half the teachers are our own students. And the second thing is I was walking through the community, and this young man roared up to me on his motorcycle, and he yells out, "Marina, Marina, we're rich." I said, "You're rich?" And he said, "Yes, we have water every day, all day." And the women are still maintaining the health services. Actually, the pharmacy and the lab are twice the size of the building that I show you there. It's just the best picture I had. And the consultation center is still open with the same first doctor, Dr. Tapia, has been there for 29 years, volunteering every week. And now there's a well baby clinic, and Juana is one of our associates, and she's in charge of the health committee. The future. The Zona Franca is closed. That means all those jobs are gone. So the community has not grown wealthier, but they are very creative, and they have created every kind of a job you can think of that would put food on the table. You find everything, anything you can think of in the town. And the future might be a development project along the beaches. It seems like it's a, I'm going to look this up to make sure I don't make a mistake. It seems to be a resort consortium, and they are planning an ambitious project for development. So, of course, the question is, how do you respond to that? And the community has a lot of fears because tourism brings in corruption, and that's scary to the families. But they're talking a lot about training the people to take the jobs so that new people don't move into the community and take all the jobs. So they're planning on more language classes in the school, in advanced computer, business administration, hospitality, anything that would train people to receive tourists. And that's a picture of the area that's being developed. So maybe tourism is the future. In the beginning, the town had no name. It was just a crossroads. And it's now named San Jose, known for good education, community development, and the population is 5,000 and some, with 1,000 and some families. And I only have 2 minutes, so I'm going to talk fast. Okay. I think that the last things that I wanted to say are important to me. Okay, I think it is a resilient community, and it's evidenced by the willingness of the population to change and broaden their views. In the beginning, they had to fight for survival, and so they were in competition with their neighbors. But now, they are working with the neighboring villages to create a municipality, which will put them on the map, and it'll also give them more services, like better water supply, better facilities of all kinds. In the beginning, the government offices said, oh, you don't need this because it exists only a few kilometers away. But the fact is, the few kilometers away, people were not willing to accept the newcomers into their orbit, and so it was not available. Today, the Crusade has actually outperformed the older, established, wealthier communities. And those communities appear like they're willing to work with this town. The community continues to attract new families with new skills, but the best part of it is it has an unusually strong sense of leadership. In the beginning, the leadership was exerted by mothers who just wanted their children to survive, but now they want to better the whole community. Is it replicable? Maybe, but probably not, because that was a moment in history, and those moments don't come often. Okay, I have just one final comment. Sometimes the perception of this community is focused on the school. And this is with reason, because the school, the relationship between school and civic growth is so important. And the other thing is that the school is so large. It's got 1,500 children. And in physical size, it dwarfs the community. And of course, it also offers 100 jobs, But I believe that the school isn't the focus of the community. I believe that the community is the important thing in this whole creation. I believe that the first 2 years of creating relationships of trust and a culture of collaboration form the bedrock of a community. And I think without those 2 years, a school probably would have emerged, but it would have been just one of those little rural schools on the side of a dusty road in a community where there is no future. You know? So I think those first 2 years are the basis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maureen. Another incredible story. So please turn to your neighbor and have a brief conversation about what stood out to you, what burning questions do you have, and we'll have time for a few questions before we take our break.
We can just leave that. That's a wonderful slide to end on. Yeah.
The other neat thing about my visit there is when I would be walking through the halls of school, doors would pop open and somebody would jump out and say, "Good evening, look at me, remember me? I was the little kid, you know, I'm teacher now." Cheers, Agro. I said, Agro, it's from Agro. It was a magic moment in time. That's why probably can't be replicated. But I do think, the hard work.
That's an important learning. I mean, that's going to be a challenge for us as well.
Yeah, even that question, who sits at the table, is so not clear to everybody. So,
Yeah.
no.
Please wrap up your conversations, and we will again have our two mic passers ready to take your questions. We have time for a few questions before break. So, Judy Biron is going to go first.
The people seem so savvy. Are they getting, and it seems that the people wanting to develop the resort are working with them, are they getting written contracts from them about, you know, we will employ the citizens, et cetera, because, you know, they always promise lots of things, but then when the thing's up and running, they bring in their own people, et cetera.
Maureen, please talk into the mic.
I don't know if they're at that stage or not. Yeah, I don't know. I know there's been a lot of conversation. And I do know the school is going to not just be a traditional academic high school, but it will be part technical and part traditional. I do know that, yeah.
Having been, Nancy Murray, having been at the school this year for a week in December, Sister Hermana Marina, her name is held holy, you can be sure, and is the Adrian Dominican Sisters. And I just want you to know, this past weekend I was doing a mission appeal in Patterson, New Jersey, and Padre Ramon Echevarria, who grew up in Haydock, he asked me right away, do you know Sister Carolina? And I said, yes, and that I had been to Haydock and stuff, and he said, how much your sisters have done for our country. And it was just a wonderful tribute. Very proud.
Maureen, I would really appreciate, you talked about how the need for water was so obvious. and how when the truck came in, if you would share with what you and Renee did to help that twice-a-week delivery of water. About the big...
Okay. You're remembering a story. That was one of our failures. Because the water only came twice a week for 2 hours, I mean, how much water can you lug up to your house and last for 3 days? We thought, well, we have the answer. If we get everyone a big tank, a big 60-gallon tank, every house will have a tank, and the water will last them from Monday till Saturday. And so we did that. We found several factories who delivered all these tanks free of charge. They were glad to get rid of them. And within, I would say, 6 weeks, every tank was gone. Why was it gone? Because if a mother has a choice, if a mother doesn't have any rice to give her child for lunch today, she'll sell her tank for the price of a meal. And so within 6 weeks, there wasn't a tank in the community. So we thought we knew the answer.
I just, it's an honor to be with you today. About 10 years ago, I did an mission appeal, and the story that was given to me was your story. A story, and this is the story, that there was a sister in her car driving through an area and just a hole of water, and they were taking a child to be buried. The sister stopped the car and said, well, if you put the coffin in the car, I'll take it to where you're going to bury the child. And the people said, no, but you can walk with us.
Yeah.
And you walked with them, and she says, let me bring my sister partner, and you came back, sat under the tree with the people, and that's where the whole thing of the education and the reason the child died was because they had no medical. And so one of the first things that what I heard that was shared was that soon, like you said, 2 women went and studied so they could start a medical clinic. So it just really is very special to be with you and to, I feel like I was walking with you as you shared your story. Again, thank you.
Other questions?
One of the key things, I think, for me was the whole thing of you and Renee being able to sit back and encourage the women to become the leaders. And I would think that was, first of all, be a great challenge and also a struggle. And maybe there were times when you and Renee would say to yourself when you go home, wow, we could fix this in a second. So can you talk a little bit about being there 2 years and being under the tree, listening and resisting that temptation to be the leaders? Because I think that's a challenge for us in this whole project.
I think it's easy for me to stay in the background. It's not something that's hard for me to do, I think. I love it when I can get somebody ready to step up to the microphone. I don't like to be the one to do that. So I think it was pretty easy. See, I was more comfortable with the community organizing than Renee was. She was comfortable in the classroom situation. But I think it's easy for me to let somebody else do the talking.
One more question. I think there's one in the back.
I just a comment. I did the mission appeal last weekend in Hamtramck with 2 different parishes, Polish parishes. 3 different couples came up to me afterward when they realized I was Adrian Dominican and that I had been in the Dominican Republic. And they said, we just got back from a resort in the Dominican Republic. 3 different parts of the island. So when you're talking about how the island is changing Maurine, into that resort area. I feel what you're saying about, wow, that could really bring all kinds of challenges and problems. And it's big money. That's what I was hearing from these people. Knowing the beaches and the islands from the time I was there, that would really be a big decision that the people of the area would have to make, I would think. I hear what you said. Thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate it.
Okay, well, let's thank again Maurine for sharing her story. So we're going to take a break, and if I could please ask you to be back at 3:20. We are looking forward to hearing Judy Biron and her story, and then we'll hear from all three of our speakers in our panel discussion. So 3:20, that's about a 12-minute break, okay?
I'm praying for you. Yeah. Thank you for doing it. I'm thanking God for you every minute. Every minute.
It's so great to hear the wonderful conversation that is going on and the energy here in Weber Center. We've heard two inspiring, incredible stories from our sisters, and we're now going to hear yet another one. Take just a minute for those coming in to be able to get seated. So, Sister Judy Biron knows the power of partnerships. Having worked with 5 religious congregations to address the growing problem of homelessness in Seattle, Judy recognized that solving the problem of homelessness was more than providing a housing unit to someone who needed one. It involved creating community with that person. Before inviting Judy to tell us how she went about creating partnerships and community, I want to say a couple things about Judy. First of all, I believe that all of us should congratulate Judy on being one of 2 recipients this year for the Legacy Award from the Interfaith Center for Corporate Responsibility. A huge honor, much deserved for work you've been doing for a very long time, Judy. And personally, I want to thank Judy for her dedication to the work of our Portfolio Advisory Board. First as a board member and now as our consultant for shareholder advocacy, for which we are very, very appreciative, Judy. So please join me in welcoming Judy to share her story with us.
Well, I'm truly honored to be here to share the story of Mercy Housing Northwest this afternoon, but now I'm truly humbled also, not only by Dee's introduction, but by Maureen's presentation. I'm really realizing how all our problems are really first world problems when we talk about the housing we've developed. And also, I have a few remarks about privilege toward the end of my little talk. And, you know, I feel so privileged with what we've been able to do and, you know, what Maurine did. So as I was thinking about what I would say, I must say I was truly inspired by Nick Tilson at the Symposium in March, and I really liked his definition of 7 generations, because before it never included me, and he did. You'll recall he said, we're looking back 3 generations, looking forward 3 generations, and honoring the generation we're in. That's us. And he said, with that kind of thinking, we're always in the 7th generation. It's always relevant, and every generation has its purpose. The generation of religious who came before us in the Northwest journeyed there over 150 years ago, and they came there because of the people's call for hospitals and schools. Now, when I entered the Edmonds Dominicans in 1960, our religious communities had embraced the religious formation movement, which blessed us with a college education and formation with our peers in other communities. And this was before Vatican II and renewal. And we like to say, the communities in the Northwest, that we grew up together and collaboration is in our DNA. So when we were in leadership together in the late 80s, we gathered our sisters to discern what ministries our communities could do together to address the needs of our day. And we saw a need to promote peace, justice, and systemic change, so we founded the Intercommunity Peace and Justice Center in 1991, and that's a story for another day. We were also truly concerned about the growing numbers of families with children who were homeless. As we were growing up, we had all experienced men who were homeless. I went to the boarding school and they would come to the back door and the sisters would feed them. But now we were encountering families who were homeless. And this was in 1990. This was, you know, years ago. So as we explored what would be a new ministry for us, we looked for partners locally. So we began looking at the different groups in our area to see what was happening and how we could partner with them. But we found the best collaborator in Mercy Housing, Inc. And Mercy Housing, Inc. had been formed 10 years earlier. And today, it has operations in 7 regions of the country, and the Northwest is one. We have, you know, there are some reserve powers to Mercy Housing, Inc., but for the most part, we're doing what we're doing there ourselves. And like all marriages, we've had our challenges, but we're both better organizations for the relationship, and also our communities are thriving. People have talked about challenges. That's, you know, we've had a few over the years, and I've been in the middle of them, but anyway. So in 1992, we founded Mercy Housing Northwest, and our mission was to create stable, affordable, permanent housing, and I'll explain that later. And we were going to do that by developing and operating, managing program-enriched housing. So that was our mission. It was worded a little different in the beginning, but that's where we are today. And we had a dream. We were going to end homelessness. That was our dream. You always need a dream. And then there's reality. So the founding communities were the Edmonds Dominicans, were there, which became the Adrian Dominicans, the Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace, Sisters of Providence, the Tacoma Dominicans, and the Sisters of the Holy Name. So we were the 5 founding communities. Now, partnering with Mercy Housing, Inc. enabled us to take on 2 projects within the first year. There were a couple developments where the developer couldn't get the funding, et cetera, so we were able to take them over at the stage that they were. But the real worker bees were us. We were the people who did the work. Linda Haydock, the first director of IPJC, likes to say that the communities gave her a pen, a paper clip, told her to find an office and change the world. We haven't quite done that yet either, but we're still working. That may be an exaggeration. Fortunately for us, IPJC had a spare office, so we had an office, but we had to set up the 501c3. We had to do the funding for our projects, tax credits, everything that was new to us. I was the bookkeeper, and I remember I had a shoebox with the invoices that I took to the developer when we had finished the first project and had to have all the bills there. We're quite advanced now. So we made our housing permanent because the parents told us that with their education and job skills, they might never be able to pay more than 30% of median income for an apartment, or maybe 60% if they did better. But they knew that if their children had a stable home and an education, that their lives would be different. And this is the next generation that Nick speaks of. And I just want to say here that, just because you have a job doesn't mean that you have access to housing. In our Mercy Housing properties, 65% of our people are employed. 11% of the people are caregivers, either for children or they have elderly or sick relatives. 8% have TANF or they're unemployed. And the others are going to school or they're between employment. Now, our median resident annual income, and I didn't put this on a slide, but is $20,900. So that's what, if we took all of our residents, what their median income is. And that's half the income that's needed to afford an apartment in Washington State. And we're really talking about, Washington State, not just Seattle. So from the beginning, our housing included the services that the residents needed because we knew that, you couldn't just give someone an apartment and expect that they were going to succeed and have everything they need. And so we listened to them for what they needed. And of course, they needed out-of-school programs. There were health issues, financial issues, et cetera. So we developed programs that would meet those needs. And this is an interesting statistic, I think, that just in the past year, over 3,000 of our residents have received over 106,000 services in our properties. We have to do all this accounting for Mercy Housing. So I don't have time to tell you, obviously, about everything that the residents needed and that we do, but I just want to tell a couple stories, and I'm going to let Guadalupe tell you her own story. It's very brief.
I got my associate's degree at Bellingham Technical College in instrumentation. I work now with Ingersoll Rand. I'm a controls tech. Me going to college, that gave my kids a motivation to pursue higher education, which helped with the community we were in. It was my support plus the Mercy Housing put together, gave them that extra push. I have 4 kids. 2 are still at home in high school. 2 oldest, Jorge Sayla, he's in Seattle University. He's studying engineering. And the younger one, he's at UTI. He's doing amazing. I've never seen him do that well. Now that I have this job, I'm able to help both of the kids with college. I don't live check by check. The hard work pays off. The kids look at that, and that's what they strive for. Mercy Housing was a big stepping stone. If I wouldn't have had that low rent, there was no way I would have been able to go to school even. I don't think I'd be where I am now if I hadn't lived there for the 5 years that I did. I mean, right now we're working on buying a house now, and time ago I would have never thought about that. It's an amazing place to be now. I'm hoping they'll all 4 go to college, which I think I'm halfway there. It makes me proud of them and of myself.
So another thing we did was listen to our families' need for out-of-school programs for the children. We have a lot of children in the properties. And, we wonder, how can a simple after-school program really impact someone's life? And I want to tell you about Renee and her girls. Renee would tell you that she arrived at Emerald City Commons with her 2 little girls and 2 bags of belongings. She was coming from a domestic violence situation. So she started working and attending classes, and she said she didn't have to worry about what her girls would do after school. They would come home, go to the community room, they'd have a snack, they would do their homework, they'd run off their pent-up energy. And when she came home, she could cook dinner in peace, play with them, put them to bed, and then do her homework. So it made a real difference in her life, and she now has her master's degree in social work. So we started with families with children, and then we expanded our definition of families when we saw a real need for housing for seniors. In the Hilltop area of Tacoma, where we have 3 senior properties adjacent to one another, we also pretty soon saw the need for health care, managing their health care. The Sisters of St. Francis have a hospital just up the hill, and you know where people go when they have a health issue, they go to the emergency room, and there was a lot of that from our properties. So we thought, you know, we need to do something about that. So we trained residents and staff with, you know, different cultural backgrounds to work with the residents in the complex on general health and wellness. And this includes exercise, healthy eating, chronic disease education if they have diabetes, and it also connects residents to primary care. And here you see that we have permaculture going on here in our raised beds. And the Tacoma Hilltop area, actually we were able to be part of transforming that area of Tacoma. It was an area where you wouldn't walk down the street in the daylight because of the gangs and the violence. And now it's really become a vital neighborhood. We have 5 properties there, 3 senior properties, and we're just going to start building another one. And then we have 2 properties that are for families with children. Now, when we started Mercy Housing Northwest, we really wanted to be in Seattle. That was kind of the focus of our communities, but we were told by the housing developers in the city and county and all that, that Seattle didn't really need us, that, you know, affordable housing was needed more around Washington State. So this shows you Washington State, and then we took over a few properties in Idaho for Mercy Housing recently. That shows you that we're mostly in that Puget Sound area. I guess I could use this in here. But we do have a few properties spread throughout Washington State. And we have 54 properties. This is after 26 years and over 5,000 residents. Now, I'm going to fast forward to a few years ago. They finally started developing light rail in Seattle. I can go from Assumption Convent to the airport on the light rail in 45 minutes, which is amazing. Finally. So when that happened, all of a sudden there was a need to develop transit-oriented housing for families, and we had a good reputation, and so they came to us. And also immigrants and refugees were moving into the area, into South Seattle. And these are mostly refugees from African countries, from Somalia, Eritrea, and those places. And you'll see that in some of the pictures. And I'm just going to show you this. This is a big poster, but we say we're creating space for families in Seattle. And this is along the light rail. Columbia Station up there that you can't see was the first one, but this Emerald City Commons, there was a church, evangelical church in the area, and they had this property, and they had a health club in a trailer, and their dream was always to build housing on this property, but they didn't really have the capacity to do it. So they came to us and said, would you partner with us? So we partnered with that church to develop Emerald City Commons. And then Mercy Othello Plaza, I'll talk about that later. That was last summer we opened that, and our Mercy Housing offices are in that building now, which is really nice to be in the heart of where these properties are. And I'm going to talk about Mount Baker in just a moment, but this just shows you the light rail that goes clear up to our office, IPJC, up there at the top. There's going to be housing, a property that we're developing at Roosevelt, which There's a light rail station there. And those others are in the process of being developed. I did put some papers outside if there's anything in particular you're interested in. Now, immigrants and refugees were a new population for us. We had Latino residents, but not really immigrants and refugees. So we did what we do best. We partnered with organizations like the Refugee Women's Alliance. And this was started over 30 years ago, and it was started by a group of refugee and immigrant women who realized that the social services really weren't meeting their needs. And so they started what's called REWA to really be an agency that could address the needs of immigrant and refugee women. And I'll tell you in just a minute something we're going to do with them. But another community need here was Somali parents recognized that their little ones weren't ready for kindergarten. So there was a program called CARE, Culturally Appropriate Responsive Education, and they came to us at Mercy Othello Plaza, and they said, could we use your community space for this pre-kindergarten? And half of the students were from our housing and half were from the neighborhood. And they just had their graduation in June, headed off to kindergarten next year with lots of energy. And it was so successful, they're going to do the program next year and then also put a program in another one of our properties down there. So Seattle has an affordable housing crisis for all ages and family configurations, and it's really just exploded once Amazon and Facebook and Google and all those groups came into Seattle, built all these office buildings, great demand for housing, people with six-figure salaries, et cetera. So there's a real gap between the people that are, have service jobs, et cetera, who are making, $20,000 a year and these other people. So a lot of homelessness and family homelessness. So last year, now it isn't working for me. Oh, okay, didn't do it hard enough. So last year, the Paul G. Ellen Family Foundation came to us with a proposal. They would give us $30 million to develop family housing. That's how much it costs to develop a housing complex, with the ground floor dedicated to a resource center for families experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. So what they wanted us to do, is build this. This whole bottom floor is going to be a resource center that families can come to, and this is an opening into the community center. There's a play area in several of these properties up at the second level because we're on busy streets where the kids can play, and then a community room on either sides. Now, this was an amazing gift, really. I mean, amazing. But now to fund the bottom floor is our challenge. Bill said it's probably going to take about $750,000 the first year to be able to open that resource center, and then $250,000 every year thereafter. So it's a lot of money. It's good work, but it's a lot of money. So what we're doing is we're partnering with the Refugee Women's Alliance. They will have a place there because they know how to work with the immigrant and refugee women, mothers, and Mary's Place and child care resources. In several of the recent properties we've developed, we have a child care in them, and it's open to our residents and also the neighborhood. So Mary's Place was established about 20 years ago, and first of all, it was just a day center for women who were homeless. And about 10 years ago, Mary's Place began having visitors who were women and children who were homeless. And this was very heartbreaking because at the end of the day, they had to lock the door and send them on their way with no place to stay. So what they first did was they partnered with the faith community, about 20 different congregations, and they would have night shelters in these churches. And today, they've converted 8 unused buildings into night shelters for moms and dads with children, and they can get 2 warm meals, a bed, and a community of support. But again, they're just shelters. It isn't permanent housing. Mary's Place model is simple and one we share, that they partner with anyone and everyone to help families experiencing homelessness. So they will also be in this Family Resource Center, as they have experience working with homeless families. And this Mount Baker family housing community will have half of its apartments for families experiencing homelessness. Now, the total number of apartments is 95. I mean, when you think of $30 million to develop that many, it's a lot of money. So, from what I've said so far, and I want to reflect a little more on resilient communities and the journey of Mercy Housing Northwest, I hope we see evidence of grassroots leadership. Now, this is a group of mothers at one of our properties, Appian Way, and they were very concerned. They formed a Justice Circle, which is a program of our Intercommunity Peace and Justice Center. And the Justice Circles look at issues that are impacting the women, and they act to do something about it. And they were concerned about the busy street in front of them that had no crosswalk, and the kids were jaywalking across the street. So they went to the city and did everything they needed to do to get a crosswalk installed. So you can be sure, I mean, it's not getting water to the village, but you can be sure that these women are now looking at the next thing that they want to impact for their lives. Community participation. This is a picture of Thomas, and he came back to Lincoln Way Apartments, where he first lived when he came from Ghana. And he came back, the residents were starting a Money Smart curriculum, and he came back to tell them his story and to help them. And Thomas went on to pharmacy school. He's a pharmacist at the hospital, and he's also on our board now. He's a wonderful man. In collaboration and partnership, Mercy Housing and King County Health Partnership engaged in a 3-year pilot to build a business case for using affordable and public housing as a platform for health. The community health workers were successful. They engaged the residents in these apartment complexes. 90% were people of color, and a majority were recent immigrants with low incomes. And what they wanted to show was that if you had health workers in this affordable housing, that the people would be able to manage their health, they'd get primary care, etc. They made the business case, but unfortunately the current administration in its work on the Affordable Care Act has not seen fit to fund this program. So right now it's waiting. Healing of the human spirit, we do a lot in all of our properties to build community, from cooking to back to school night to different classes, etc. And this is a picture of a resident leading a yoga class. And One Planet Thinking, of course, we have green design for our buildings and energy efficient apartments, but many of our properties also include gardening. And this is a picture of Lillian, who's at Hillside Gardens. That's the hilltop area that I mentioned, and she's got a harvest of lettuce there. Now, how many of you used to listen to Paul Harvey's Rest of the Story on the radio? Well, I loved it. And so as I was preparing this and thinking about Mercy Housing, we've been around for 26 years, and so I had a dream that 25 years from now, another Judy Biron would be standing here, because I'm going to be way over 125 years, and telling you the rest of the story of Mercy Housing Northwest. And this is kind of where our challenges and opportunities are, and what we hope to do in the next 25 years. When we started this, we just had no idea where we were going to go, and here we are. And so the next 25 years, we still have work to do. So the story is going to talk about how we found a reliable funding stream for our resident services. We develop housing with loans, grants, we use tax credits, we get grants from the cities, from the counties, from the states. They'll build the housing, but when it comes to funding the services, we have to raise that money. And, you know, our people who do that write from 90 to 100 grant applications a year. And, you know, thankfully, we've received some ministry trust grants, but if you've written a grant application, that's a lot of grant applications, and it doesn't really create resilience in the area of resident services. So that would be probably our number one challenge or opportunity. And, you know, as I said, the families need these services if they're going to succeed. And then also this new Judy Biron will tell you about Mercy Housing Northwest's racial equity work with staff, board, and residents, and how it's empowering our residents to navigate and change the social systems. And I'm very proud of our staff and our board that just recently we embarked on this work, and the staff has been doing it, and the board now is engaged, and then we're going to engage the residents. And here we have 8 core social equity issues, and Janet talked about equity earlier, and I think you see in these that we have services that address them. However, we realize that our services also need to be designed to empower the residents to change these systems. So it's a matter of, as Janet said, we're not just a direct service organization. Well, we do have direct services, but we want those direct services to really empower the residents. Now, back to this Judy Biron. As I reflect on privilege, and I certainly felt privilege as I listened to Maurine, and one's responsibility to use it for the common good, I'm recognizing that Mercy Housing Northwest has a housing privilege, and I think the board and staff is realizing this. Over our 26 years, we've acquired, and rightly so, a reputation for building and managing housing where families and communities that can thrive. We used to have to go and look for places that needed housing, and now people come to us and say, we need housing here. We are among the largest providers of affordable housing in Washington State. And as someone who's been involved with our housing ministry since the beginning, I was on the leadership team when we started it, and I've been on this board almost every year since. Every year they have to grandmother me in. I can only have 1-year terms, so every December they vote to let me stay on the board. It's nice of Mercy, isn't it? I'm proud to say that I really experience our board and staff using this housing privilege to strengthen and build up our peers in the housing and services industry in Washington State. I mentioned Emerald City Commons and how we partnered with them to develop that housing. With our services, like if we do a back-to-school backpacks for our kids, if there are any other affordable housing groups, we include those children. When we have medical vans come to our properties, it's for anyone in the neighborhood that meets the requirements, et cetera. So we really try to build up the neighborhood in addition to our property. Now, a few lessons that I've learned in these years. First of all, if you dream it, you can do it. But as you saw that slide with the bees, you know, the world needs dreamers, yes, but the world needs dreamers who can do. So you have to not only dream, but you have to be willing to do it. But we can do it only if we're willing to risk ourselves and our resources. And I think that that's what we've committed to in our Resilient Communities enactment. Use our resources for the common good. And in our community, I'd have to say that Barbara Madison of happy memory, and I can't believe she's been gone 10 years now, She was one of those risk takers, and she drug me along shaking and trembling several times in things she did, but Dorothy could verify that too, that Barb was a real risk taker. So that's a story for another day. I could tell you some stories, but another is that really that nuns matter. And so I think we have a nun privilege right now, that who we are, what we do, and what we stand for is noticed by people, and it really makes a difference. And I think that some of this privilege we've earned, and some of it comes from the women who came before us. But we have a responsibility now in this generation to really use that in this day before, the next 25 years for the common good. And last year when we were doing our board evaluation, I see I have 1 minute. Tom, who's a public policy expert, he just wrote across his board evaluation, I'm on this board because I like to hang with the nuns. So another thing is, we've talked about it, relationship, collaboration, to keep on keeping on, the good times and the hard times, and we've had some hard times. I'm here to tell good stories today, and then the co-workers. We've really been able to attract and support and retain staff and board members who embrace the mission. And they also have experience and expertise beyond our wildest dreams, things we don't even know we need. And we have 18 staff members in the Mercy Housing office. So I'm going to end with a story. So last summer, we were dedicating Mercy Othello Plaza. That's our latest property. I was asked to say a few words from the founding communities. And I shared how we started Mercy Housing Northwest with a dream, and sadly, we were experiencing growing numbers of people who were homeless in Seattle. We had over 2,000 applications for 108 apartments at Mercy Othello Plaza. So we held a lottery. Unfortunately, Wanda had the last word. She shared how she'd come from the island of St. Thomas and had to depend on relatives and friends willing to take her in and lend her their sofa. She said she was in the hospital and she got a phone call that her lottery number had come up. She got herself released, and she was overjoyed that she had an apartment. And I put a paper out there, Wanda's story. It tells a little more about it. But she concluded her story. She looked straight at me, and she said, "You did end homelessness. You ended it for me." And, fortunately, she had the last word. So I'm going to end where I began, with 7 generations, and we have gratitude for all those who came before us, and a resounding yes to the work that is ours to do today, and a confidence that we can give the generations to come a future full of hope. Thank you.
Judy, thank you so much. Setting so well. Okay, please talk to your neighbor about what inspired you and what burning questions you'd like to ask Judy. We'll take a couple minutes to do that.
I got kind of carried away in some parts, that's why.
Yeah, you got your things. Wow. That's so inspiring, Judy.
Yeah, it is. It's, as I said, we have our ongoing challenges it's going to be, but I just wish we could get, the Paul Ellen group was willing to give the money for the building, but if we could get some of those people to do an endowment for the service, that's what we need.
That's the challenge, that sustainable stream of funding, which is so hard to get.
Yeah, it is.
And there are foundations that won't give to it.
Yeah. We have after this, we're going to the
You're going to do the panel.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So we're doing okay on time.
the panel might be a little shorter than we originally planned, but I think this is important.
Yeah.
They obviously loved the chance to do questions with each other.
Yeah. And the exciting part is the groups. So we really do all this our own. They're kind of a parent organization, but they have a big group in California, Chicago, the South. I mean, really good work.
Are they doing, well, I'll ask you that in just a minute. All right, if you'll please wrap up your conversations, and if our microphone sharers would please be ready. Who would like the first question for Judy? Yes, there's one in the back.
Curiosity question. Do people stay there, or is it a place where they live for a while and then from there find a home?
Well, I didn't bring statistics on the turnover, but some of those people, like that woman at Sterling Meadows, had been there for 6 years. And Renee, the young woman who got her master's degree, and she's been doing contract work, she's still at Emerald City Commons. So as long as their income does not go above the threshold of that building, there are rents at 30%, 50% and 60% of the median income of the area, they can continue to live there. And even if they're after their children are gone.
Other questions? Carol has a question.
Just wondering, does the city also offer some subsidized housing such as this?
Well, we can, some of our we can get some Section 8 credits for some of the residents, but that's it. I mean, the city isn't subsidizing our housing, but there are Section 8 they can get.
Just had a question. As a leader and looking for this dream to materialize in the beginning stages, I imagine that there are a lot of obstacles and challenges and some failures and some successes. And how do you deal with motivating your team to visualize the dream, to be motivated to push forward to materialize that dream when you're faced with all these different challenges?
Well, in the beginning, it was just us. It was the representatives from the community. And we put together a board. We were able to attract some rather good people for our board, much more knowledgeable than us. You're talking about teachers and nurses. I mean, none of us had any expertise in housing. And we didn't really, one of the sisters became, well, we hired a director who was kind of a real go-getter, and so got us into some trouble too with Mercy Housing because she was a go-getter and took things on. But then one of the sisters became the director, and then for a while, the Mercy has a group in California, and their director or president was our director, and so there was nobody, on site. And it took us, several years before we finally had our own director and, had a real, you had to have a presence where you were. You couldn't have your director in California. If you needed a meeting this afternoon with the city, how do you do that? So I would say that the leadership was a challenge too. We had people who were willing to do the work, but we didn't, have the expertise to do it. So, finally we were able to attract someone that's just excellent. But I think the greatest challenge would probably have been in the leadership. We were able to attract someone who was, could do the development and that type of thing. But you need a good director because you need to do all that PR work too.
I have a question.
Okay.
I'm really interested in the comment you made about the racial equity work that your organization is doing, and especially with the board, and the impact that you're looking to have on really helping the helping change systems, not just fix a problem, but how do we change the system that created the problem in the first place. Could you just talk briefly about what is the process that your board is going through to position itself in the organization to be able to engage the residents in the community in being able to do that work?
So this is something, I think it'll be just a year in December that it was started. And they started with the staff. And so to really help the staff understand what equity means, and you know, that they're about empowering the residents, you know, as well as providing these services. So to really get them on board to understand what it means. And then the board was presented and asked for a buy-in, and doing this work also, the board doing it, because, you know, we've got great board members with, you know, their bankers and somebody who's in charge of the Refugee and Immigrant Office in Seattle and all those things. But to really have us work together to see how we can't just provide housing and services. We really need to be about changing the systems that puts people in that housing and, you know, puts people, you know, in society with no education and jobs aren't available, et cetera. So we're just beginning it. And then after, I didn't bring the timeline, but there's a timeline for when they'll begin working with residents with that view too.
Very interesting, very interesting. Well, let's thank Judy for her presentation and inspiration. And what I'd like to do now, since you sat down, is to ask you to stand up and come. We're going to ask our panel to come and sit in these chairs up here. And Elise, if we could borrow your microphone so that everyone can hear them answer the questions. What we'll do is I have a few sort of overarching questions I'd like to ask our panelists as a whole, and then we're going to open it up to you to ask one or all of the panelists additional questions that maybe you didn't get to ask as we were going through our afternoon. And we'll just take about 15 or 20 minutes to have an opportunity for this dialogue with our speakers today before we adjourn our session. So the first question I'd like to pose is, I know that we've all talked a bit together here, and we all know what we're working on as far as resilient communities and the enactment. I would be really curious to hear from your perspectives, listening to each other today, what you would pull out of what you heard as sort of those common themes that would be valuable for us to really focus on and pay attention to as we continue to do this work. So what do you hear in what each other has said that you would raise up as a common theme that we really ought to listen up, pay attention to?
Well, one thing I think is one size doesn't fit all. I think you've heard about three very different things. And if I today was to go back, you know, where we started in 1992 and look at housing, you know, we probably would start in a different place from where we started then. So I'm going to stop there.
Common themes.
Oh, sorry.
No, I don't know. Well, what I heard, I think, is that we need to walk with the people who we would like to serve. I don't know any other way to do it, because we honestly don't know what someone else needs or what someone else's struggles are unless we walk with them.
Yes, my comment was local leadership, just the continually looking at who is the community and what can we do as we look to the future and rely on the past, but we're looking to the future in new ways of developing that.
Okay. All of you were very generous in sharing with us some of the challenges that you faced as you've worked in the community, on the projects that you've worked on, and with the people that you've engaged in those projects. If you could take a step back and think about it from this perspective, if you were starting over today to do what you ended up doing, what might be one thing that you would say, you know, this is what I would do differently and why?
It's a lot to think about.
I think I know one. We were so outraged by the way the neighboring communities treated the newcomers in our situation that I was totally impatient with the well-established communities. And I think I would have given them more respect than I did. But I was just outraged with the way they treated the newcomers. You know.
If we were starting now and looking at the city of Detroit as we did in 2000, I would say I was more hopeful then. We had the Hmong community in our area, and we're working with different groups of people on the east side of Detroit. Patty and I were both there. And I feel right now the challenges in the city are still very major because the people are not being included in a lot of the decision making. And just a simple being on Woodward and Jefferson yesterday for me and watching 18 people at 5 o'clock come out of a company and cross the street in front of me at Hart Plaza, I said, this is, there are two young African Americans, one or two Hispanics, and a couple of Asians. It was predominantly one people were building the city and building housing and attracting, and it just feels like I don't know what I would be doing, but I sure would be well aware that that we need to really look at systems without a doubt and what's happening systemically. And we are involved in the People's Water Board and different things only when our board members or somebody takes an interest in it right now. But if I was starting in the beginning, I would say those would be huge kinds of partnerships that we might want to work on.
Thank you. All right, well, let's turn to all of you. We only have one microphone now to float around, so please be patient with us. But Fran, Sue has a question here.
I'm not sure who this question is for exactly, but I have a concern about going back to capacity building. And I'm wondering if we don't have like a pre-step that we're skipping if we don't do capacity building in the communities we're considering.
Okay.
And I wonder if you could comment on that.
So what are your thoughts about capacity building and the need for it before we engage in bigger projects?
Yeah, I've talked about that. I think that, you know, in areas where there's need to develop resilient communities, you know, how does that even begin? And, you know, we did the Resilient Communities Cafe and talked about, you know, where we saw a need and then what are the resources in the area, you know, that could be part of that, and then were there some sisters willing to work on that. But how do you assess the need and who the leaders are? I think, well, I'm going to give an example of a ministry trust group that we've funded for 10 years. Nuestra Casa in the Yakima Valley. It's a ministry with Latina women. It has ESL, helps them get their driver's license, citizenship, helps with the school, you know, advocacy in the schools, et cetera. It's a wonderful ministry. But they're in a city where The whole city council's white, all the school board is white, all the teachers in the school are white, and all of that. And the majority population are Latino. So what that ministry, considered, but didn't have really, the director didn't have the capacity, and the women didn't, is to take them to the next level. How can these women be organized? How can they organize themselves to be leaders and to begin to infiltrate these systems? And, with the capacity building grant, they might be able to hire a person, not an expert, but somebody who's going to come in and do that listening and, listen to the women and then get the women to begin saying what they could do. Because the director has her hands more than full, and there are only a couple staff people, and the women aren't going to do it on their own. So I think Santa Catalina, our ministry, is ripe also for resilient communities. But the people who are there, they don't have time. They're helping these women with the things they're doing now. So is there someone who could go there, spend time there, see what's happening, talk to the people, see what could happen, and then see if we could do something? Because, anyway.
Okay, any other comments on capacity building from anyone? All right.
I think the key to what I'm hearing, and then I'm speaking of what I've been doing for many years in working with the community, and that is we need to listen to the people. And even though they might not have education, PhD, and all that kind of stuff, people do have talents. And how do we, and then the gift that we bring is that we listen and we know, we can recognize the talents, to affirm them and to encourage them. Because I'm a Mexicana, and there's one thing about us is that we're very close to each other, and we help each other. And I'm thinking of in Latin American countries, we're able to make it because we have each other. That whole thing, again, the importance of community, and me coming in as a person that is walking into a poverty area, I do not come in to fix it. I come in to walk with you, to listen to you, to affirm your gifts and draw them out. Because, one of the things, even for all of us, I'm sure you experience it, there's some things that are so natural to us. When somebody points it out to us, oh, but that's nothing. But it is something. It is something. And so again, people that can listen and affirm the gift that is there. And the other thing is not just me affirming them, but the people within the community saying, yes, you're really good at that. For them to affirm each other, that gives them, the people that are kind of shy or whatever, to have more confianza in themselves to do and to use the gifts that the Lord has given them.
Thank you for that comment.
And communities need, the community that Maurine spoke of, San Jose. Without Renee and Maurine went there and they listened and they encouraged the women, and then when they could be a resource were. But without the two of you, they probably would, it might not even be there anymore. So that's what I'm talking about. Where are the Maurines and the Renees? And they might not be in this room, but if there might be somebody that needs a little salary to go there and be the Renee and the Maureen. That's,
Carol, and then Lynn over here has a comment to make.
Well, I want to, is this working?
Yes.
I want to affirm what you just said, because I've been bowled over by these stories. I mean, I've been very inspired. And to me, we're talking about resilient communities, but I'm thinking that we have to do that. We have persevering, resilient people, and those would be you three. The group I'm most familiar with is Voices for Earth Justice, because I was there at the beginning, and I just remember what it takes, you know, the days and the struggles and the raking leaves in the cold, and there's no electricity, and there's no light, and it's hot, and there's bugs, and there's dirt, and there's, you know, and I remember when I first saw Hope House, that Janet and Patty, honest to God, Jen, I never thought I'd say this, but I thought you had lost your minds. I mean, I saw this house. I thought it should be raised, this ramshackle thing, you know, and now look at it, it's thriving, and the community is involved. So just want to applaud all of you.
Thank you. Fran Lynn here has a comment. Lynn from Habitat for Humanity, right here in Adrian.
You went there and you lived there, and I believe that's what made the difference, just as you've said. So people, when we launched neighborhood revitalization here in historic East Adrian 4 years ago now, we were told, you're crazy, what are you thinking? You can't change it. Well, we were already seeing change. But to the capacity issue, we struggled for 3 years. We applied for grants, we were turned down, but you persevere. I think of Nick, who was here with that first panel and said he applied 33 times for that grant before he got it. I will never forget that. That inspired me. So we applied again this year to HUD for a capacity building grant, and I was so angry last year when we didn't get it, because I just knew this is our time, we're ready, we're in the sweet spot of this initiative. But we weren't ready, and God knew that, better than me. And this year we did get the capacity building grant, which allowed us to hire D'Angelo Boone for 3 years, fully funded position to focus in this community. And the difference is he lives in the neighborhood. He's respected by the people. He's brought them to us and us to them in a different way in 6 months that we didn't accomplish in 3.5 years. So I'm grateful for the grant. I'm grateful for you. And just the support of the community for neighborhood revitalization here.
Yeah. And thanks to Lynn and D'Angelo for coming to speak to the Adrian Resilient Communities Committee and sharing their journey. We learned a lot from that conversation, and it resonates with much of what we've heard today as well, right? So there really are some common themes that are emerging from all of these discussions we're having that I think are going to hold us in really good stead as we continue this journey together to figure out how to live into the enactment. So I think one more question, if we do.
It's not a question. I thank God this young woman, because that's what I was going to, when we started to talk about capacity things, I right away, I'm just, wait a minute. If you don't do the work that these people have said, that Nick said, it's got to be trust. Yeah. And that's what happened. 2 years living there before they really, look at the number of years before they're really, even with Judy, how many years, and now they're starting on systemic changes. And to me, if you don't have that, and I'm thinking of Bridges Out of Poverty, that whole program, if you don't bring everybody to the table, forget it. You might just as well start all over again. So I just really applaud and just say that's important. And then I wonder to ourselves, can we do that? Are we patient enough to really be with people that long? That's what you were saying. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great challenge, Pat, to all of us, and yes, we can, right? Yes, we can. So I think, again, let us thank our wonderful panelists here, our speakers. And I'd like to turn it back to Pat to close our meeting today.
Well, it's my honor really to thank everyone. I really want to particularly point out and thank Dee for your coordination and leadership of this meeting. talk about partnering in patience and planning. So as we thank you, Janet, Maurine, and Judy for your stories of resilience, I think it's already been said, some of the common themes. I don't think we can identify the resilient communities unless we ourselves are resilient, unless we are willing to be patient, to listen. And one of the things that I noted that with each of you, you had others right next to you in this work. You didn't do it by yourself. And relationships and someone to work with to help the dream get rooted, be sustained, is so important, I think, as we go forward. And I think we, as Adrian Dominicans, we are invited into learning what real partnering means and not being in charge. We don't know well how to do that yet, but we're learning. So just profound thank you. We have been inspired. As Adrians and everybody else in this room, I think we are proud, humbly proud. We're proud of the communities that their lives have been enriched because of your commitments and your fidelity and your ability to draw in others. So we all join in thanking you so very much.